A mother dog begs for help after losing her puppies. But what happens next shocks everyone. In her darkest hour, she stumbles upon 5 tiny orphaned kittens and claims them as her own. At first, it feels like a miracle. But behind this tender act of love hides a dangerous secret, one that could tear everything apart. As the bond between this grieving mother and her adopted family grows, powerful forces rise against them, threatening not just their future, but their very survival. What hidden truth could turn a story of second chances into a fight for justice? And when love is tested by cruelty, who will truly come out on top? This channel isn't just about stories. It's about holding on to what still matters: empathy, truth, love, and the courage to care. The late April sun cast long shadows across Lydia Brewer's weathered Kentucky farmland as she knelt beside Clara in the old barn. The golden retriever's amber eyes, usually bright with life, were clouded with a pain that cut straight to Lydia's heart. 6 tiny bodies, still and silent, lay in the nest of blankets they'd prepared with such hope just days before. "Oh, Clara," Lydia whispered, her calloused hand gentle on the dog's trembling head. "I'm so sorry, girl." Her voice caught in her throat as Clara let out a low, mournful whine that seemed to echo through the empty barn. The morning had started with such promise. Clara's labor had begun just as the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon. Lydia had stayed by her side, offering comfort and encouragement as each pup arrived. But something had gone wrong. Despite Lydia's desperate phone calls to the local vet and her own fevered attempts to help, each puppy had slipped away, one by one, leaving Clara with nothing but emptiness where her maternal dreams should have been. Now, Clara's lean body shook with grief as she nosed at her lifeless puppies, trying to warm them, to wake them, to bring them back through sheer force of will. The sight brought fresh tears to Lydia's eyes, memories of her own losses surfacing like unwelcome ghosts. The empty space beside her in bed where John used to sleep seemed to echo Clara's pain, that horrible void that nothing could fill. "Come on, sweet girl," Lydia coaxed, trying to guide Clara away from the stillborn pups. "Let's get you some water." But Clara resisted, her paws scraping against the barn's wooden floor as she tried to return to her babies. The days that followed were harder than Lydia could have imagined. Clara's grief manifested in ways that broke Lydia's heart anew each time she witnessed them. The dog would pace restlessly through the farmhouse, her nails clicking against the hardwood floors as she searched every room. She'd pause at empty corners, sniffing hopefully, only to drop her head in disappointment when she found nothing. At night, Clara's whimpers would pierce the darkness. Lydia would find her scratching at the barn door, desperate to get inside where she'd last seen her puppies. Sometimes she'd dig in the yard, as if her babies might be buried somewhere in the soft earth, waiting to be found. "It's okay, Clara," Lydia would say, sitting beside her on the porch steps, sharing their grief in the quiet Kentucky twilight. "I know it hurts. I know exactly how it hurts." She'd wrap her arm around Clara's shoulders, feeling the dog's body tremble with suppressed whines. The farm's financial troubles seemed to weigh even heavier now, with Clara's loss adding another layer of despair to Lydia's already burdened shoulders. Bills piled up on the kitchen table, and the repairs the old farmhouse needed couldn't wait much longer. She'd hoped the puppies might help, both emotionally and financially. But fate had other plans. Clara's maternal instincts, so cruelly, denied their natural outlet, showed themselves in other ways. She began gathering her toys, arranging them in careful piles in her bed. She'd guard them fiercely, treating each stuffed animal as if it were one of her lost puppies. Sometimes she'd even try to nurse them, a sight that made Lydia's throat tighten with emotion. During their daily walks around the property, Clara would stop at every small sound, her ears perking up hopefully. A bird's chirp, a rustle in the grass, anything that might be a baby in need of her care. But each time, reality would crash back in, and Clara's tail would drop, her search continuing with desperate determination. "You've got so much love to give," Lydia would tell her, watching Clara nose through tall grass near the fence line. "Sometimes life just isn't fair with where it lets us put that love." She understood the feeling all too well, the need to care for something, to pour your heart into a purpose that suddenly wasn't there anymore. The spring days lengthened, but the shadow of loss hung heavy over the farm. Clara's food bowl often remained full, her appetite diminished by grief. Lydia would sit beside her, encouraging her to eat, sometimes even hand-feeding her to ensure she kept up her strength. It reminded her of those first dark days after John's, passing when neighbors had done the same for her. Each morning, Clara would make her way to the barn, her steps heavy but determined. She'd nose around the spot where her puppies had been born, then scratch at the door when Lydia gently led her away. Her eyes held a question that Lydia couldn't answer. Where had they gone? Why couldn't she find them? The maternal instinct that should have been lavished on her puppies had nowhere to go, leaving Clara restless and searching for something, anything, to fill the void in her heart. The late morning sun beat down on Lydia's worn pickup truck as she made her way into town, a list of errands clutched in her hand. Her mind wandered to Clara, still grieving back at the farm. The golden retriever had barely touched her breakfast, spending the morning scratching at the barn door and whimpering for puppies that would never return. Turning onto Main Street, Lydia noticed something unusual by the roadside. A cardboard box sat tilted against a telephone pole, looking sadly out of place. Something about it made her slow down. As she pulled over, a faint mewing sound caught her attention. "Oh no," she whispered, her heart sinking as she approached the box. Inside, 5 tiny kittens huddled together, their bodies trembling. They couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, their eyes barely open, fur matted and dirty. They were so weak they could hardly lift their heads to look at her. "Who could do such a thing?" Lydia muttered, anger and compassion warring in her chest. The kittens were barely clinging to life, dehydrated and hungry. Despite her own troubles, the mounting bills, Wade Kellerman's increasing pressure about the farm payments, she couldn't leave them there to die. With gentle hands, Lydia lifted the box into her truck. The kittens mewed pitifully, their tiny bodies pressed together for warmth. Her mind raced with practical concerns. She could barely afford to feed herself and Clara, let alone 5 more mouths. Wade would have plenty to say about this, no doubt. He always had opinions about how she ran things, even though it wasn't his business as long as she made her payments. The drive home seemed longer than usual, each bump in the road making her wince as the kittens wobbled in their box. When she finally pulled up to the farmhouse, Clara was waiting by the porch, her tail low, eyes still carrying that haunted look of loss. "Clara, stay!" Lydia called out as she carefully lifted the box from the truck. But before she could decide what to do next, Clara's nose twitched. The golden retriever's ears perked up, and she trotted over with more energy than she'd shown in days. Lydia held her breath as Clara peered into the box. The dog's reaction was immediate and astonishing. Instead of the indifference or aggression Lydia feared, Clara's whole demeanor changed. She began whining softly, her tail wagging with gentle excitement. Setting the box down on the porch, Lydia watched in amazement as Clara immediately started nosing the kittens, carefully inspecting each one. Her tongue darted out, beginning to clean their matted fur with the same tender care she would have shown her own puppies. "Well, I'll be," Lydia breathed, watching as Clara settled herself beside the box, her body curling protectively around it. The kittens, responding to her warmth and attention, began to stir more actively, their tiny mews growing stronger. Lydia's eyes filled with tears as she watched Clara gently lift each kitten one by one and settle them against her warm belly. The dog's eyes, which had been so full of sorrow, now shone with purpose. She looked up at Lydia with an expression that clearly said, "These are mine now." The transformation was remarkable. Clara, who had spent days lost in grief, suddenly had a new mission. She wouldn't leave the kittens' side, treating them as if they were her own lost puppies. When Lydia brought a bowl of warm milk, Clara watched, attentively as each kitten was fed, nudging the weaker ones forward with her nose. "You're a natural mama," Lydia said softly, scratching behind Clara's ears. The dog's tail thumped against the porch boards, her attention never fully leaving her adopted babies. Where there had been emptiness and loss, now there was purpose and love. Throughout the afternoon, Lydia watched as Clara tenderly cared for her unexpected family. The kittens, responding to her warmth and attention, grew stronger by the hour. Their pitiful mews transformed into more confident squeaks, and they snuggled confidently against Clara's fur, accepting her as their surrogate mother. The sight filled Lydia with a warmth she hadn't felt in days. Yes, there would be challenges. Wade's disapproval, the extra expense, the work of caring for 5 tiny lives. But watching Clara's transformation from grieving mother to protective guardian, Lydia knew she'd made the right choice. Sometimes, hope came in unexpected packages, even ones abandoned by the roadside, Bill's and Wade Kellerman's constant pressure. She couldn't leave them to die. Carefully, she gathered the box and placed it on the passenger seat of her truck. "Hang on, little ones," she murmured, abandoning her errands to race home. When she pulled into her driveway, Clara was lying on the porch, her head resting dejectedly on her paws. But as soon as Lydia stepped out with the box, the golden retriever's ears perked up. The faint mewing drew her attention immediately. Clara bounded down the steps, her nose twitching with curiosity. Lydia set the box down carefully, worried about how her grieving dog might react. To her amazement, Clara's entire demeanor transformed. The dog gently nosed aside the box flaps and peered inside. Her tail began to wag slowly, then with increasing enthusiasm. Without hesitation, Clara began tenderly licking each kitten, cleaning their matted fur. She settled beside the box, curling her body protectively around it. The change in her was remarkable, the desperate sadness in her eyes replaced by a new sense of purpose. Word spread quickly in their small town. By early afternoon, a sleek black Mercedes kicked up dust along the gravel drive. Lydia's heart sank as Wade Kellerman stepped out, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel. He was dressed in an immaculate suit that seemed wildly out of place. On a farm, his cold eyes taking in the scene before him. "So it's true," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You've taken in more strays, as if you don't have enough troubles managing what you've got." Clara's head snapped up at his approach, and a low growl rumbled in her throat. She positioned herself between Wade and the box of kittens, her usual gentle nature replaced by fierce protectiveness. "They were abandoned," Lydia explained, trying to keep her voice steady. "They would have died if I'd left them." Wade's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "And how exactly do you plan to feed these useless mouths? You can barely keep up with your rent, as it is." He gestured around the farm. "This place needs work, Lydia. Real work, not sentimental charity cases." Clara's growl grew louder as Wade took a step closer. He glared at the dog, then at the kittens nestled safely behind her. "You're proving yourself more irresponsible by the day. This isn't a shelter for unwanted animals." "These kittens aren't hurting anyone," Lydia protested. But Wade cut her off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Let me make this clear," he said, his voice hardening. "You have until the end of the month to prove you can manage this property properly. That means repairs, maintenance, and paying your rent on time, not collecting strays." He straightened his suit jacket. "If you can't demonstrate responsible management, I'll have no choice but to consider eviction." Clara's protective stance never wavered, her amber eyes fixed on Wade. The wealthy landowner shot her a contemptuous look before turning back to his car. "1 month, Lydia," he called over his shoulder. "Show me you can prioritize what matters or find somewhere else to live." As the Mercedes disappeared down the drive, Lydia's legs felt weak. She sank down beside Clara, who immediately turned to check on her kittens, nudging them gently with her nose. Looking at her dog's devotion to these tiny orphans, Lydia realized this simple act of kindness had put her directly in Wade's crosshairs. The implications were clear. This wasn't just about taking in abandoned kittens anymore. Wade Kellerman had made it about power, about control, about forcing Lydia to choose between compassion and survival. Clara pressed against her side, warm and steady, still guarding her adopted babies. In that moment, Lydia understood that this new bond between dog and kittens would mean standing up to Wade, no matter the cost. The smallest kitten hadn't moved all morning. While the others tumbled and played under Clara's watchful eye, the tiny orange tabby lay curled in a tight ball, barely breathing. Lydia's heart sank as she touched its fragile body. It burned with fever. "Oh no, little one," she whispered, gently lifting the kitten. Clara whined anxiously, pressing close to inspect her sick adoptive baby. The golden retriever's amber eyes reflected Lydia's own worry. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Lydia paced the kitchen, cradling the kitten. The nearest vet was in Millbrook, 30 minutes away in good weather, but the storm clouds gathering outside were anything but good weather. "I have to try," she told Clara, who followed her every move. "We can't lose another one." Lydia tucked the sick kitten into a small box padded with towels, then gathered the other 4. She couldn't leave them alone, and Clara would never stay behind. The rain began falling in heavy sheets as they hurried to the truck. The windshield wipers fought, a losing battle against the downpour. Lightning split the sky, followed by deafening thunder that made the kittens cry out. Clara pressed against the passenger door, her body curved protectively around the box of kittens. "It's okay," Lydia murmured, though her knuckles were white, on the steering wheel. "We're going to make it." The truck's headlights barely penetrated the wall of water. Lydia leaned forward, straining to see the road. Another flash of lightning revealed the curve ahead. Too late. The truck's tires lost their grip on the slick pavement. Lydia's stomach lurched as they slid sideways. She turned into the skid like her father had taught her, but momentum carried them off the road. The truck tilted sickeningly as it dropped into the flooded ditch. "No! No! No!" Water began seeping under the doors. The kittens wailed in terror while Clara barked frantically, scratching at the window. Lydia tried to restart the engine, but it only sputtered. The water was rising faster now, nearly reaching the seats. She grabbed the box of kittens and held them high, her mind racing. The doors might be stuck. The windows. They'd have to break a window. But Clara was already forcing her way through, the partially open back window. The golden retriever splashed into the rising water, then bounded up the muddy bank. Her barking echoed through the storm, desperate and determined. "Help is coming," Lydia told the trembling kittens, though she wondered who could possibly hear them in this weather. "Clara won't give up on us." Minutes stretched like hours as the water crept higher. Lydia climbed onto the seat, still holding the kittens above the flood. Clara's barking never stopped. Then, headlights pierced the darkness. 2 trucks pulled to a stop on the road above them. "Hello? Anybody down there?" "Here," Lydia called out. "We're here." Strong hands helped her climb out through the window, passing the box of kittens to safety first. Clara danced around their rescuers, tail wagging despite her soaked fur, clearly pleased with herself for bringing help. In the back of a warm pickup truck, wrapped in borrowed blankets, Lydia held the sick kitten close. Clara pressed against her side, still guarding her adopted babies. They'd lost precious time, but they were alive. All of them. of them. "Your dog saved your life," one of the rescuers said, shaking his head in amazement. "We'd never have seen you in this storm if she hadn't been raising such a fuss by the road." Lydia scratched behind Clara's ears, her hands still shaking. "She's not just my dog," she said softly. "She's their mother." The golden retriever's tail thumped against the seat in agreement as she tenderly nosed each kitten, making sure they were all safe. Through the truck's windshield, Lydia could see the vet clinic's lights glowing in the distance. They would make it, after all, thanks to Clara's unwavering devotion to her adopted family. Dr. Ruth Halverson's practiced hands moved gently over the tiny orange kitten's body, her sharp eyes noting every detail behind her rimless glasses. The examination room was quiet, except for Clara's anxious panting as she stood pressed against Lydia's legs, refusing to move more than a few feet from the metal examination table where her adopted baby lay. "The fever's quite high," Dr. Halverson said, reaching for her stethoscope. "But I can hear his heart beating strong. We'll start him on antibiotics right away." She smiled reassuringly at Lydia. "You did the right thing bringing them in, especially after that scary drive through the storm." Lydia exhaled shakily, still rattled from their near disaster on the rain-slicked roads. "If Clara hadn't been there to alert those passing drivers—" "She's quite remarkable," Dr. Halverson observed, watching as Clara stretched her neck to sniff at the kitten. "I've seen mother dogs adopt orphaned puppies before, but this level of cross-species nurturing is special. She's channeling her loss into saving these little ones." The vet examined each of the other 4 kittens in turn, Clara's eyes tracking every movement. When one of the black kittens mewed in protest at getting a shot, Clara whined and took a step forward, only settling when Dr. Halverson murmured gentle reassurances. "Their protective instincts can be so pure," the vet said softly. "Unlike some humans I could name." Her tone held an edge that made Lydia look up sharply. "Wade Kellerman's been by to see you already, hasn't he?" Dr. Halverson asked, her voice carefully neutral as she made notes in her medical chart. Lydia nodded, her shoulders tensing. "He's threatening eviction if I keep them. Says I'm being irresponsible." Dr. Halverson's pen paused mid-sentence. "Wade Kellerman talking about responsible animal care?" She gave a short, bitter laugh. "That's rich." "What do you mean?" The vet seemed to choose her next words carefully. "Let's just say I've had concerns about his breeding operation for years, the condition of some of the animals I've treated." She shook her head. "But he's careful, keeps everything just legal enough on paper." Lydia frowned, thinking of Clara's earlier life at Wade's farm before she'd rescued her. "Clara came from his breeding program. They'd marked her as poor stock, were going to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I know." Dr. Halverson's voice was gentle. "And she's not the only one. I've seen too many cases of neglect and suspicious injuries. But without solid evidence." She straightened up, squaring her shoulders. "The point is, don't let him intimidate you about what's best for these animals. You and Clara are giving these kittens a chance they might not have had otherwise." Lydia stroked Clara's head, feeling the dog lean into her touch. "I'm just trying to survive right now. Keep my farm running. Pay the rent. I can't afford to make an enemy of Wade." "Sometimes staying quiet only lets the real problems grow," Dr. Halverson said. She began preparing medications, measuring out doses with precise movements. Clara understands something Wade never will, that love and protection aren't about profit margins. Look how she defends these little ones that aren't even her own species. As if to demonstrate, Clara gently nosed each kitten as Dr. Halverson finished their treatments, checking them over with maternal concern. The smallest orange kitten had perked up slightly after its injection, making tiny mewing sounds that brought an immediate response from Clara's tail. Lydia watched them together, remembering how Clara had growled at Wade when he'd approached. The kittens. She'd never seen her gentle dog show aggression before. Maybe Clara sensed something in him that Lydia needed to pay more attention to. "Here's enough antibiotics for 10 days, Dr. Halverson said, handing over a small bag of medications. "Keep them warm, continue feeding them every 4 hours. Come back if you see any changes." She hesitated, then added more quietly, "And Lydia, if you ever want to talk more about Wade's operation, my door is always open. The weight of the vets." Unspoken concerns hung in the air between them. Lydia gathered up the kittens, watching as Clara immediately positioned herself to guard their carrier. She couldn't ignore the growing sense that there was more at stake here than just her own struggle to keep her farm running. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Lydia's farmhouse as she settled into what had become their new routine. Clara lay in her usual spot by the wood stove, all 5 kittens nestled against her warm belly. The smallest one, still recovering from his illness, nursed with particular eagerness while Clara gently cleaned his orange fur with her tongue. Lydia couldn't help but smile at the sight, even as worry gnawed at her insides. The stack of unopened mail on her kitchen table grew taller each day, and she knew exactly what waited inside those official-looking envelopes from Wade Kellerman's office. "At least you're all getting stronger," she murmured, kneeling down to scratch behind Clara's ears. The golden retriever's tail thumped against the floor, but her eyes never left her adopted babies. The crunch of tires on gravel made Clara's ears perk up. Lydia's heart sank as she recognized Wade's glossy black truck pulling up her driveway. Clara let out a low growl, carefully shifting her body to better shield the kittens. Wade's heavy boots thundered up the porch steps. He didn't bother knocking, instead slapping a piece of paper against her screen door with enough force to make it rattle. "Final notice, Lydia," he called out, his voice carrying that false note of concern that made her skin crawl. "You've got 30 days to vacate the property." Lydia's hands trembled as she opened the door. Wade stood there in his expensive boots and pressed jeans, looking more like a businessman than a farmer. He thrust the paper at her chest. "Wade, please," Lydia started, her voice barely above a whisper. "This farm is all I have left. After Tom died—" Should have thought about that before taking in more mouths to feed. Wade cut her off. His gaze drifted past her to where Clara lay with the kittens. "Though I could help you with that particular problem. Got a friend who's always looking for hunting dogs. As for strays..." He let the threat hang in the air. Clara's growl grew louder, and she curved her body more tightly around the kittens. The smallest orange one mewed in protest at being jostled. "You leave them alone," Lydia said, finding strength in Clara's protective stance. "They're not causing you any harm." Wade's pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something, cold and ugly underneath. "No good comes from mixing species like that. It's unnatural. That dog of yours should have been culled from my breeding program years ago. Too soft-hearted. Seems like that particular trait runs in this household." Lydia's fingers clenched around the eviction notice. "Clara is twice the mother any of your breeding dogs could be. She saved these kittens' lives." 30 days, Lydia," Wade said, turning back toward his truck. "And if I were you, I'd keep that dog inside. A lot of coyotes been spotted lately. Be a shame if something happened to her while she was protecting those worthless cats." Clara barked sharply at his retreating form, the sound full of protective fury. Lydia waited until Wade's truck disappeared down the road before letting her legs give out. She slid down the wall to sit on the floor, the eviction notice crumpled in her fist. Clara immediately abandoned her post by the wood stove, padding over to rest her head in Lydia's lap. The kittens, not to be left behind, stumbled after their adoptive mother on unsteady legs. The little orange one climbed right into Lydia's lap while his siblings crowded around. "What are we going to do?" Lydia whispered, stroking Clara's soft head. The dog's amber eyes met hers with such trust and determination that Lydia felt her despair crack just slightly. Clara had refused to give up when she lost her puppies. She hadn't given up when the kittens needed her, and now, surrounded by this unlikely family she'd helped create, Lydia knew she couldn't give up either. Still, Wade's threats echoed in her mind as she double-checked all the doors and windows that night. Clara refused to sleep in her usual spot by Lydia's bed, instead positioning herself near the front door, her body tense and alert. The kittens, sensing their mother's unease, huddled together in the basket Lydia had placed nearby. Sleep was hard. To find that night, with every rustle of wind sounding like footsteps, every distant dog bark making her wonder if Wade's threats about coyotes were more than just words. But through it all, Clara stood guard, a living symbol of the fierce love that had brought this strange little family together, and the strength they would need to protect it. The veterinary clinic's waiting room was quiet except for the gentle whir of an old ceiling fan. Dr. Ruth Halverson leaned against her desk, arms crossed, her usually warm features tight with concern. Wade Kellerman's breeding operation isn't what people think, Ruth said, her voice low despite them being alone. I've treated too many dogs from there, seen too many unexplained injuries, too many preventable health issues. Lydia shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I can't get involved. Ruth, he's already threatening to evict me. Look at these, Ruth said, pulling out a thick folder. She spread photos across her desk. Dogs with matted fur, clouded eyes, and protruding ribs. These are the lucky ones that made it to my clinic. Most just disappear. Lydia's stomach churned as she looked at the images. What does this have to do with me? Ruth pulled out one more photo, yellowed with age. Lydia's breath caught. There was Clara, much younger and terribly thin, huddled in a corner of a wire cage. Her gentle eyes held the same haunted look Lydia had seen when she first found her. Clara came from his operation, Ruth explained, softly. He sold her off cheap because she was too gentle for breeding, called her defective stock. She paused, letting the words sink in. That's why she connects so deeply with those kittens. She knows what it's like to be thrown away. Lydia's hands trembled as she picked up Clara's photo. Everything suddenly made sense. Clara's immediate bond with the abandoned kittens, her fierce protectiveness, her reaction to Wade's presence. How did I not know? Wade keeps his operation quiet. The fancy show dogs everyone sees. That's just the surface. Ruth's voice hardened. But there's a barn on his back property. That's where he keeps the others. Lydia stood up, pacing the small office. Even if what you're saying is true, what can I do? I'm about to lose my home. Or, maybe this is how you save it, Ruth countered. Wade's operation isn't licensed properly. One thorough inspection would shut him down. She pulled out her phone, showing Lydia a satellite map. The barn is here, past the tree line. Nobody goes there except Wade and his hired help. Lydia stared. At the screen, her mind racing. She thought of Clara, how she'd transformed from a discarded breeding dog into the most devoted mother she'd ever seen. How she'd chosen to love those kittens despite everything she'd been through. Or maybe, because of it. I'll need help, Lydia said finally. Ruth's face broke into a determined smile. I've got a friend at the county animal control office. We just need evidence. That evening, as the sun began to set, Lydia and Ruth parked Ruth's car along the back, road behind Wade's property. Clara sat in the back seat, unusually still, as if sensing the gravity of their mission. The barn should be just through these trees, Ruth whispered, checking her phone's map again. Wade's at the county fair today, showing his prize winners. They moved carefully through the woods, Ruth's camera ready. The old barn came into view, its weathered walls leaning slightly. Clara's ears flattened against her head, and she pressed closer to Lydia's leg. The smell hit them first, a thick, acrid stench that made Lydia's eyes water. Through gaps in the wooden slats, They could hear whimpers and the rattling of cages. Ruth documented everything with her camera, the rows of stacked crates, the filthy conditions, the hollow-eyed dogs that stared back at them. Many looked like Clara had in that old photo, with that same defeated expression. "Look at this," Ruth called softly, pointing to a clipboard hanging by the door. "He's not even keeping proper vaccination records. This is completely illegal." Lydia moved deeper, into the barn, Clara trailing behind her. The golden retriever stopped suddenly, her nose pressed against one particular cage. Inside, a dog that could have been Clara's twin lay curled in the corner. "That's her sister," Ruth said quietly, checking the clipboard. "They were from the same litter. Wade kept her for breeding." Something broke inside Lydia then, seeing Clara's sister, imagining Clara in these same conditions, understanding truly for the first time what her dog had survived. This wasn't just about saving her home anymore. This was about stopping the cycle of cruelty that had almost broken Clara's spirit. Clara pressed her nose through the cage bars, touching her sister's fur gently. The other dog lifted her head slightly, meeting Clara's eyes with a flicker of recognition. "We've got more than enough evidence," Ruth said, reviewing the photos on her camera. "My contact at Animal Control can be here first thing tomorrow." As they made their way back through the woods, Lydia's mind was on Clara. How she'd taken those abandoned kittens and given them everything she'd been denied here. How her gentle nature, the very thing Wade had deemed a fault, had become her greatest strength. Back home, Clara immediately went to check on her kittens, gathering them close and breathing in their scent as if to wash away the memories of the barn. The smallest one, the orange tabby, pawed at her face until she gave him a gentle bath, her whole body relaxing into her role as mother. Lydia watched them, seeing Clara's devotion in a new light. It wasn't just maternal instinct driving her. It was an act of defiance against the cruelty that had once deemed her worthless. Every gentle lick, every protective growl, every moment of patience with her adopted babies was Clara's way of proving Wade wrong. Ruth's voice on the phone that night was full of quiet confidence. "Animal Control will be there at 8 o'clock. Tomorrow morning, Wade won't know what hit him." Lydia hung up and sat beside Clara and her kittens, running her hand through the dog's soft fur. "You showed them all wrong, didn't you, girl? You turned out to be the best mother any baby could ask for, even if they're not quite what anyone expected." Clara's tail thumped against the floor, her amber eyes full of the wisdom that comes from surviving darkness and choosing light instead. "Wade. Kellerman's breeding operation isn't what people think," Ruth said, her eyes dark with worry. "I've treated too many dogs from his property, all showing signs of neglect." Lydia clutched her phone, where dozens of photos now burned like evidence of a nightmare. She and Ruth had sneaked onto Wade's property at dawn, documenting the horrors they found in his hidden barn. The images showed rows of wire cages stacked 3 high, dogs lying in their own filth, many desperately thin with matted fur and dull eyes. "I can't believe Clara came from here," Lydia whispered, her voice cracking. The realization hit her again. Her sweet, gentle Clara had once been trapped in this hell, deemed worthless and discarded. No wonder she protected those kittens so fiercely. Ruth nodded grimly. "With these photos and my veterinary records, we have enough to bring him down. The sheriff needs to see this." Within hours, Sheriff Tom Bennett arrived with 3 deputies. Lydia's hands shook as she showed him the evidence on her phone. His weathered face grew darker with each swipe of her finger. "This is something else," he muttered, shaking his head. "Dr. Halverson, you'll testify to the conditions?" "Absolutely," Ruth said firmly. "I've been documenting suspicious injuries from his dogs for months." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Police cars and animal control vehicles crowded Wade's property. Officers led out dog after dog, each one a living testament to his cruelty. Lydia's heart ached watching them emerge, blinking in, the sunlight as if they'd forgotten what it looked like. Wade arrived just as they were loading the last carrier into the rescue van. His face turned purple with rage. "This is ridiculous! You have no right!" "We have every right," Sheriff Bennett said calmly, holding up a warrant. "These animals are being seized as evidence of criminal neglect." Lydia felt a surge of triumph, watching Wade sputter and protest. Finally, justice would be served. She could keep her farm, Clara, and the kittens without fear of his threats. But her victory was short-lived. The very next morning, a sharp knock at her door revealed 2 deputies. They looked uncomfortable as they handed her a court order. "What is this?" Lydia asked, though dread was already pooling in her stomach. "Mr. Kellerman's lawyer is claiming Clara as his property," one deputy explained. "Says she was stolen from his breeding operation. They're also claiming the kittens as evidence in his defense. Something about proving his animals receive proper care." "No." The word tore from Lydia's throat. "Clara's mine. I have adoption papers." "From the shelter that found her abandoned by the road," the deputy said gently. "His lawyer says that's not proof of legal surrender." "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we have to take them into protective custody until this is sorted out." Lydia rushed to where Clara lay with her kittens, wrapping her arms around the dog's neck. Clara sensed her distress, whining softly and pressing closer. "You can't," Lydia pleaded. "She's traumatized from that place, and the kittens, they need her. They're still nursing." Ruth arrived just then, summoned by Lydia's desperate phone call. She tried arguing medical necessity, but Wade's lawyer had anticipated everything. The court order was ironclad. Lydia watched in helpless anguish as Clara was led away, straining against the leash, trying to return to her kittens. The tiny felines mewed pitifully in their carrier, reaching through the bars with tiny paws as if trying to touch their adopted mother one last time. When the deputy's car disappeared down the drive, Lydia collapsed onto her porch steps, sobs racking her body. Ruth sat beside her, one arm around her shoulders. "He's using the system against us," Ruth said bitterly. "Using his money and influence to twist everything around." "What am I going to do?" Lydia whispered. "He'll hurt them. You know he will." The morning sun felt cold now, offering no comfort as it rose over her empty farm. In trying to stop Wade's cruelty, she'd given him the perfect weapon to destroy everything she loved. The triumph of exposing his operation had crumbled into her worst nightmare. Clara and the kittens back in the hands of the man who had caused them so much suffering already. Ruth squeezed her shoulder. "We're not done fighting," she said firmly. "We'll find a way to prove Clara's yours and get them back. Wade Kellerman isn't going to win this." But Lydia barely heard her. All she could think about was Clara's confused, frightened eyes as they took her away, and the helpless cries of the kittens losing their mother for the second time. The weight of her failure pressed down on her chest until she could hardly breathe. Lydia sat in her empty kitchen, staring at the paperwork spread across her table. Legal documents, court orders, and a calendar marked with the upcoming hearing date seemed to mock her. 3 days had passed since they'd taken Clara and the kittens, and each hour felt like torture. "Maybe," she whispered to herself. Fingers, tracing over a voluntary surrender form. "Maybe if I just sign them over to him, he'll leave us alone." Her voice cracked. At least they'd be alive. Ruth's coffee cup clattered against the table as she set it down harder than necessary. "You can't be serious." "I don't know what else to do." Lydia's voice rose with desperation. "He has all the power, all the money, all the connections. What chance do we really have?" Before Ruth could answer, her phone buzzed. It was a message. From one of the shelter workers caring for Clara and the kittens during the legal hold. "They can't separate them," Ruth read aloud. "Clara won't let anyone near the kittens. She's completely wrapped around them. Won't eat unless they're nursing. First," she showed Lydia a photo that made her heart catch. Clara lay curled in a tight circle, her body forming a golden fortress around the 5 tiny kittens. Her eyes were alert, watchful, daring anyone to try taking her babies away. Even in captivity, she refused to give up her role as protector. "Look at her," Ruth said softly. "She's not giving up. Why should you?" Lydia stared at the image until it blurred through her tears. Clara's devotion struck something deep inside her, a chord of strength she thought had been broken. Here was this dog, who had lost everything once before, still fighting with every fiber of her being to protect what she loved. "You're right," Lydia said, wiping her eyes. "What was I thinking? Clara wouldn't abandon them. I can't either." Ruth smiled, pulling a thick folder from her bag. "Good, because I've been gathering evidence. Every suspicious injury I've treated, every complaint filed against Wade's operation, every witness statement from former employees." She spread the papers out, replacing the surrender forms. "We're not just fighting for Clara and the kittens anymore. This is our chance to stop him for good." They worked through the morning, building their case. Ruth called other veterinarians who had treated dogs from Wade's breeding operation, collecting statements about injuries consistent with neglect and abuse. Lydia reached out to former farmhands, finding several willing to testify about the conditions they'd witnessed. By afternoon, their kitchen table map had grown into a web of Wade's misdeeds. Photos, medical records, and testimonies painted a picture of systematic cruelty hidden behind wealth and influence. "We need more," Lydia said, studying their evidence. "Something that proves Clara was one of his dogs, but also shows how he treated her." Ruth tapped her pen thoughtfully. "The breeding records. Wade's operation was licensed, which means he had to keep documentation of all his dogs. But those would be in his office," Lydia pointed out. "The police already searched during the raid." "Not his office," Ruth corrected. "The county records department. Licensed breeders have to file quarterly reports. They're public record." They drove to the county courthouse immediately. The records clerk seemed surprised by their request, but led them to a dusty back room filled with filing cabinets. Hours passed as they combed through years of breeding documentation. Finally, Lydia's hand froze over a page. "Here," she whispered. "Clara's registration number matches the tattoo in her ear." The document detailed Clara's breeding history at Wade's facility. Multiple litters in too short a time, each one sold for profit until her last pregnancy failed. The final notation was brutal in its simplicity. "Stock unsuitable for breeding, marked for disposal." "Disposal," Lydia repeated, her voice shaking with anger. "He threw her away like garbage because she couldn't make him money anymore." "But she survived," Ruth reminded her, "and now she's proof of everything he did. This isn't just about keeping Clara and the kittens anymore. It's about making sure he can never hurt another animal." Back at the farm, they organized their evidence for court. Medical records showed Clara's recovery after being found abandoned. Photos documented her transformation from a traumatized breeding dog to a loving companion, and now, most powerfully, her fierce protection of the orphaned kittens demonstrated her true nature. Not disposable stock, but a soul capable of deep love and healing. "We'll need to show the judge how Wade's pattern of cruelty connects to Clara's story," Ruth said, arranging their exhibits. "How she represents every animal he's ever treated as nothing but a commodity." Lydia nodded, her determination growing stronger. She thought of Clara, still guarding her adopted babies despite everything. That unwavering devotion deserved an equally unwavering defense. "I was so afraid of fighting him," she admitted. "But Clara never stopped fighting for what she loves. Neither can I." They worked late into the night, preparing their arguments, rehearsing testimony, and building a case that would expose Wade's true nature to the court. The hearing was still days away, but Lydia felt stronger with each passing hour. Clara's protective instinct had awakened something similar in her, a fierce resolve to guard those who couldn't defend themselves. Wade thinks money and influence can hide what he's done, Lydia said as they finished for the night. But Clara's love for those kittens shows what he can never understand. Some things are worth more than profit. Ruth gathered their files, carefully organizing them for court. We'll make him understand. One way or another, this ends with the truth coming out. Lydia looked at the photo of Clara and the kittens one more time before heading to bed. Her dog's steady gaze seemed to speak directly to her heart. Stand firm. Stay strong. Protect what matters. I will, she whispered to the image. I promise. Lydia sat with the voluntary surrender form in her trembling hands until Clara's old collar, still lying on the kitchen counter, caught her eye. The worn leather spoke of years of loyalty, of a bond that went deeper than any legal document could define. A knock at the door startled her. Ruth Halverson stood on the porch, her veterinary bag in one hand and a thick manila folder in the other. Her eyes were bright with determination. I've got something you need to see, Ruth said, striding into the kitchen. She spread documents across the table, pushing aside the surrender form. These are Clara's original sale records from Wade's operation. Look at the date and the price. Lydia leaned forward, squinting at the faded writing. $50 for a purebred golden retriever? Exactly. Ruth's finger traced the notation at the bottom. Defective breeding stock. Insufficient maternal instinct. That monster marked her as worthless because she wouldn't produce puppies on his schedule. But look at how she cared for those kittens. That's not defective. That's extraordinary. Tears welled in Lydia's eyes. But what good does this do us now? He's got them. It proves everything. His whole operation was built on lies. Ruth pulled out more papers, photographs, veterinary reports, testimonies from former employees. We're not just fighting for Clara and the kittens anymore. We're fighting for every animal he's ever hurt. The next morning, the county courthouse buzzed with tension. Lydia's hands shook as she smoothed her best dress, a simple blue cotton thing she hadn't worn since her husband's funeral. Ruth sat beside her, professional in her white coat, their evidence organized in neat folders before them. Wade strutted in wearing an expensive suit, his lawyer carrying a leather briefcase. He barely glanced at Lydia, but his smirk said everything about how confident he felt. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Margaret Chen, called the court to order. Wade's lawyer went first, painting a picture of a legitimate businessman being harassed by an emotional widow who couldn't manage her own affairs. But when it was their turn, Ruth stood and began methodically destroying Wade's facade. She presented Clara's records, explaining how the defective dog had shown remarkable maternal instinct with the abandoned kittens. Then came the photographs, dozens of them, showing the horrific conditions in Wade's breeding operation. Your Honor, Ruth said, her voice steady, this isn't just about one dog and 5 kittens. This is about systematic abuse masked as legitimate business. We have testimony from 3 former employees. She gestured to nervous-looking young people in the gallery. They'll tell you about puppies dying from neglect, about breeding females worked to death, about animals sold as defective, simply because they showed basic emotional needs. Wade's face grew redder with each revelation. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Wade shoved him away, standing up. This is ridiculous. Those animals are my property. Mr. Kellerman, Judge Chen warned, sit down or I'll have you removed. The testimony continued for hours. Former employees described Wade's cruel practices. Local farmers spoke about mysterious late-night burials on his property. Ruth presented medical records of dogs rescued from his operation, showing patterns of abuse and neglect. Through it all, Lydia kept thinking of Clara, gentle Clara, who had lost her puppies and found new purpose with 5 tiny kittens. When it was her turn to speak, she stood slowly. I didn't set out to expose anyone, she said softly. I just wanted to help a mother who'd lost her babies. Clara showed me what real love looks like. It doesn't care about profit or bloodlines or what someone says you're worth. It just gives everything it has." Judge Chen listened intently, her expression thoughtful. When all testimony concluded, she took only 15 minutes to return with her decision. "The evidence of Mr. Kellerman's systematic animal abuse is overwhelming," she declared. "This court finds him guilty of multiple counts of animal cruelty. He is hereby banned from owning or breeding animals for life. His property rights to all animals currently in protective custody are terminated. Furthermore, full custody of the golden retriever Clara and the 5 kittens is granted to Lydia Brewer." Wade exploded from his chair, face purple with rage, but bailiffs quickly surrounded him. His empire of cruelty, built on the suffering of innocent animals, crumbled in a single moment. Lydia barely heard the rest of the judge's ruling about fines and monitoring. Her heart was already racing toward the animal shelter where Clara and the kittens waited. An hour later, she watched through tears as Clara bounded from the shelter van, immediately searching for her adopted babies. The kittens tumbled out of their carrier, mewing excitedly as Clara gathered them close, checking each one with gentle nuzzles. That evening, as sunset painted her farmhouse in warm gold, Lydia sat on the porch swing watching Clara stretched out in the grass. All 5 kittens were curled against her belly, purring contentedly. One black and white kitten batted playfully at Clara's tail while she watched with patient maternal pride. "Look at you," Lydia whispered, her heart full. "They said you were defective, but you knew better. You just needed the right family to love." Clara's tail thumped softly against the grass, her amber eyes peaceful as she watched over her unconventional family. In that moment, Lydia understood that sometimes the strongest bonds aren't the ones we're born into, but the ones we choose, the ones we fight for with everything we have. The evening settled into gentle quiet, broken only by the sound of purring and the soft rustle of Clara adjusting to make sure all 5 kittens were snug against her. Together, they had faced down cruelty and won. But more than that, they had proven that love knows no boundaries, not between species, not between blood and choice, not between what others say we are and what we know we can become. If today's story echoed in your heart, I hope you'll stay. Subscribe and I'll be here again tomorrow with another quiet story full of the kind of love that lasts.